JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, and I'm delighted to welcome on the show today Bruce James Wilson from Florida's Space Coast in the United States of America to talk about his book, The Oubliette. Now, when I first looked at the book, my initial thought was, why the title? And what is an oubliette? Why the title? Well, that I'll let you all figure out. And when you've read the book, you can decide for yourself why the author called the book The Oubliette. But as to what is an oubliette, well, it refers to a secret dungeon, a pit, with a trapdoor in the ceiling as the only means of entry and escape. The word itself derives from the French word oubli, which translates as forgot. So simply, an oubliette was a secret pit dungeon, mainly in a medieval castle where prisoners were thrown down and forgotten about. Does this give you a sense of what's coming down the line? Maybe, maybe not. But formulate your own opinion once you've listened to this podcast and looked at the book. Just to give you a little insight as to Bruce himself, he was born in Miami and spent most of his childhood boating in the Biscayne Bay area, no doubt trying to keep cool from the hot Florida sun. And no doubt trying to look cool at the same time. For those fun-loving summer days there in Florida, in Miami. As a youngster, he moved with his family to Florida's Space Coast, where he presently lives with his wife, Nancy. However, he does most of his writing sitting on a veranda in a cool oasis of woodland estate at his sister-in-law's house in North Carolina. And having previously chatted to him there on the veranda, while we were putting this podcast together, I can't but agree with him what a wonderful place to write, with the local bird life singing in the nearby woods. It's a pity that we can't do the podcast from there, everybody, because it was breathtaking, and the bird life behind him singing away, it was just stunning. But there you go. You're just going to have to put it with him, everybody sitting in his Florida house. Anyway, let's invite him on the show to talk about himself and his book, The Oubliette. Bruce, come and join me.
Hello, John, and thanks for having me on. How are things in jolly old England today?
I'll tell you what, the weather is fantastic. The sun is absolutely amazing. I've been out for a walk in the countryside today, and I'd probably say we're hotter here than you are in Florida, because the last podcast I did was yesterday, and it was a gentleman from Florida again. He says, we're cool, calm, and cloudy here. And I says, we're hot and sunny. And you can keep your clouds.
Yeah, we're cool, calm, and sunny today.
So anyway, Bruce, I know you write under the name B. James Wilson. Would you care to tell the audience a little about yourself and why you wrote this book?
Sure. I got interested in writing as a kid, and writing is really about reading. I read the book She by H. Rider Haggard, and it just set me on fire. I wanted to do that. I wanted to be able to tell stories that transported people, to worlds that they otherwise would never know. So as far as the oubliette goes, I taught Bible for 20 years. And in every class, when we went through Genesis, we would get to chapter 6, and people would have unlimited questions about the sons of God that are mentioned there, and them consorting with the daughters of men and producing what the Bible calls Nephilim. So that was the inspiration, is all those questions. I did a lot of research, much of it in the book of Enoch, and I learned everything I could about these Nephilim, and I found the story intriguing. So that was the inspiration for the oubliette.
Really? So were you, I mean, I certainly was. Were you a fan of The Lord of the Rings?
Oh, yes. Yes,
We've got something in
definitely.
common there, everyone. Because, sometimes when, towards the end of the book, there's a tower that everybody climbs. And when I was reading that, Bruce, do you know what? It took me right back to the tower in The Lord of the Kings. And I
Yes.
just thought, I bet Bruce loved Lord of the Rings, not Lord of the Kings, Lord of the Rings.
Yes, I do.
Thought so. There you go, everyone. I was right. Yee-hee. The book, everyone, has 43 chapters. We're not going to go into all 43 chapters, because if we did, we'd never end. We'd be here forever and a day. And we would. This is a chunky book, everybody. And that's not the concept of this podcast. The whole idea of this podcast is to give you, the listeners, the audience, an understanding of flavor of what the book is about. So we're going to sample 8 chapters. And these are chapters that both myself and Bruce have picked out because we think they're the most significant chapters within the book, which would give you an overall account of what this book is about. So, Bruce, if I don't mind, I'd like to go to chapter 1, which you head up, who's down there. You set the scene in New York City. Mike Brennan is a fire rescuer. He's the main protagonist throughout the whole book. It's 9/11, 2001. The Twin Towers images of collapsing are beamed across the world. In the opening paragraph, you have Mike peering through dirty glass into a building's basement, a building that's on fire. He's looking into a pit where he has seen movement, albeit shadowy movement. Against regulations, he goes down to explore his instincts, and he comes across 2 street kids whose parents are either in jail or hooked up on drugs. So here's the oubliette, everybody. The basement, that's the pit, that's the dungeon. And the 2 street kids, abandoned and forgotten by society. It's a stunning, powerful start to this book. There's 2 street kids, the boy not abandoning his sisters who's trapped under the stairwell in a furnace of fire that's about to engulf them, and Mike's heroic attempts to bring these forgotten street kids to safety. My question to you, Bruce, is here. It's going to be interesting what the answer is going to be. What was the thought process going on in your head when you constructed this startling first chapter?
Well, thanks for the question, John. There's an interesting backstory to chapter 1, and here's what it is. In the original manuscript, that was actually chapter 4.
Really?
But yes, but my most trusted beta reader, when she read the book, told me that she almost didn't read the book because she got to chapter 3 and she still didn't know anything about the main character. She felt she couldn't connect to him. And on that recommendation, I decided to bring the main character to the front of the book and introduce him. But let me explain my reasoning for not doing that, in the original manuscript. In the original manuscript, it opens with Mike waking up in the darkness. And he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know where he is. And he doesn't know how he got there. So I I I told the story from that point onward, uh, and that took 3 chapters before we got to what is now chapter 1. And I thought that it was a good idea, since Mike didn't know who he was, that maybe the readers shouldn't know either. It turned out that wasn't a good idea. So I made the switch, and that's how that chapter became chapter 1.
I think the switch was right. Whoever suggested that, they got that right, because yes, when you have a book, everybody, you've got to get the first 2 chapters there. You've got to grip the audience, the listeners, the viewers, and so your first 2 chapters have got to be absolutely on the mark. You might have a fantastic ending, but if you haven't got a good start, nobody's going to look at the ending. So I think that person was absolutely
true.
right, because it's a stunning opening chapter.
And this is why she's my most trusted beta reader.
There you go. Trust her.
Yep.
Bruce, let's move on to chapter 4, Boy Who Was.
All righty.
This chapter for me, Bruce, captures an inner imprisonment people can find themselves in a world of their own darkness. People can be in their own dark hole with only one way in and out. People who society, a bustling society, have forgotten, don't want to know about. They're in their own inner oubliette. So here we go again, everybody. Oubliette is coming up in the book. Trapped in their own minds. So, you can have an oubliette be a physical thing, and it can also be a mental thing as well. And this is the mental bit. And the story of Michael here, the image of a small boy who had seen too much and known too little. One of hundreds, perhaps thousands, who wandered the streets and alleys of the New York City, never knowing the warmth of human kindness. Michael fears of vertigo, which, if you have ever been unfortunate enough to experience, anybody, it's terrifying. So, Bruce, can you tell us why the storyline in this chapter, and why now in the book, this time in the book?
Certainly. I guess I want to say that you've perceived the right thing. We live in 3 worlds. We live in a physical world, an intellectual world, and a spiritual world. And the story that I'm telling in the oubliette is about how all those 3 worlds intermingle and relate to each other. So Mike has found himself in this dark place. And as I said, he doesn't know who he is. He's suffering from amnesia. And suddenly this boy appears. Well, I have to tell you as a writer that sometimes stories, they take their own path, and characters come up and they sort of take over the story. I attribute that to the spiritual aspects of writing or any art. And that's kind of what happened with the boy. Is I wanted Mike to begin to remember something about his childhood. And so I sort of told that story in there, but I wanted to make it real to him in the moment. And so this boy, who's sort of a combination of him in his childhood and the boy he was trying to rescue in the basement, he suddenly appears to him in this darkness. And he becomes sort of a path. Is Mike, the boy, keeps appearing and disappearing, and Mike is kind of following him. And what's happening is the boy is leading Mike to the oubliette, where the rest of the story will take place. Did I answer the question?
You did, because when I read that chapter, I immediately thought he's got flashbacks here of the boy he's rescued from, in the chapter 1. And
Yes.
I also started to think, is it the boy in that chapter, or is this the boy in himself when he was younger, or is it both? And I'm thinking now, maybe it's a little bit of both, but let's the viewers make their own mind up. Bruce, I want to go on to chapter 12. Now, we are moving quickly through the book, everybody, because when I do the podcast, I always pick a few chapters from the beginning and some towards the middle and some towards the end. So you get a flavor of what the book is about. So chapter 12, Bruce, you wanted this when we were talking about what chapters to put in the podcast. You specifically said, I want chapter 12 to go in, which is headed up Sticks. Now, so you said to me, well, as I said, it's a very significant chapter to you. So you start the chapter off, I quote, "In Mike's next awareness, he was lying naked in a fetal position on the cobbled floor of the oubliette, facing the great wooden doors. You take us back to the opening chapter scenes of Mike in the burning building basement, 9/11, and the street kids." This is what I think it is. Why is this chapter so important for you? And would it be important for those people who want to read the book?
I hope that it would be important to them, but I'll tell you why it's important to me. I think that one of the biggest failures in Western society today is our failure to recognize the existence of a spiritual world. We try to live our lives as if we were beings that are strictly physical and intellectual, emotional between that. But the reality is that we're missing a leg. And unless that third leg is in place, your life can be a disaster. And that third leg is your spiritual existence. This chapter brings that out to the fore. You have a battle going on between this demon, Azazel, and the main character, Mike. They're both trapped in an oubliette. Both of them want to get out. And in order to do that, Azazel is trying to convince Mike that they can only do that through cooperation. This is a great ploy of the devil and his minions, is first to convince you that they don't exist, and secondly, to battle for your mind. These evil forces want to take over your mind and make you see the world in a way that's actually alive. So that's what's going on here in this chapter. As a background, because our audience didn't get this, this chapter follows an event where Mike's goes through this disastrous examination of a pair of great wooden doors that exist in the oubliette. These doors represent time and circumstance. But when Mike went up to examine them, the demon warned him not to go there, because he tells him that these are the doors to hell, and he would regret stepping up to them. But Mike went anyway, and when he gets up there, suddenly he finds himself surrounded by flames. And he manages to escape, but not without getting burned. And by the way, his nakedness represents his vulnerability.
Yes, that's what I thought, is vulnerability. And it's quite striking here, because here you've got him in flames. Again, this is in his own mind. And immediately it's going back to chapter 1, that important chapter, the flames engulfing. He's rescuing the 2 street kids. He's facing flames there as well, but they're physical flames.
Yes.
These are mental flames.
Yes.
And they're spiritual flames. That's the whole concept of the oubliette.
Right.
So
I was going to say that when Mike wakes up after all these flames surrounding him, the demon explains to him that was Styx, the river that runs through hell. Well, I had 2 purposes in this, and the one was to show how the demon is manipulating Mike. And the second was to try to open people's eyes to the fact that this burning hell that the Bible talks about actually exists. It's for real. It doesn't exist in this dimension, but it actually exists. So really, that was the idea. And you'll note that at the end of the chapter, the demon closes their conversation by reminding Mike. He says, Styx, he just reminds him that that's what he just experienced.
Who's the demon, everyone? I'm not going to say. Read the book. Now, I liked the next chapter we're going to go to, Bruce, here, and it's chapter 14, which you've headed up, Against Darkness. Here we have a mixture of events. Mike's own oubliette, as we've already talked about, place of confinement, a gargoyle, Azel, the serpent, Elohim creating heavens and earth, when there was only darkness. The power of the logos, the cursed words, let there be light. Light being the antithesis of darkness. This is a busy section of this book. Would you care to tell the listeners why you wrote it and what's going on here?
Sure. It's, this is a continuing theme of the spiritual world that exists around us. And what's happening is Azel is trying to convince Mike that evil is good and good is evil. I point out that this chapter, the whole point of view of this chapter is from the demon's point of view. And that again, he's lying because he's almost incapable of anything else. And in his lying, he's trying to convince Mike that evil is good and good is evil. So he introduces the idea of rebellion, and he explains to Mike that Mike himself is part of a rebellion against God. And that is true by default. And he, at the same time, in this effort to convince Mike, he he does what Adam did in chapter 3 of Genesis. At the very beginning, was he tries to foist responsibility off onto God. In Genesis, when Adam is eaten from the fruit of knowledge, and God calls him on it, Adam's response is, it was the woman. In other words, I'm not at fault. It was the woman that you gave me. And so you can see that Adam tried to blame God for what happened.
And of
that's
course,
what
it's then that they realized that he was naked, wasn't he?
Yes.
And you talk about that, you know, in your book with Mike. So this is all tying up everybody. Now, let's go to chapter 20, Bruce. And I've got a little bit of sense of humor here, everybody. This is just my humor. Because the title of the chapter is called Assessing the Situation. Now, when I first saw this, it immediately took me back to the musical Oliver. And there was a character in that musical called Fagin. And he was played by the actor Ron Moody. And there's a scene in the musical Oliver. We're reviewing the situation. So it was just my sense of humor here when I saw the title, Assessing the Situation. I immediately thought of Fagin in the musical Oliver reviewing the situation. Because it's about the same. We're assessing the situation. It's doing the same thing.
We are.
That's by the by. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the book, everybody. It's just my little sense of humor. And we all need a sense of humor, believe you me. So
yes, we do.
This is a short, snappy chapter involving Tony, Phil, and Jim, who, you know, these are more sub-characters, everybody coming into the book. It's nicely embellishing the overall story. We're getting Mike out of a hole. But so I'm asking the question is, what made you, Bruce, put this little storyline in the book at this stage of the book?
Yeah, I do like Fagin's response. Well, this chapter could be subtitled, Meanwhile in Another Dimension. I mentioned earlier about us existing in three worlds: the physical world, the intellect, and the spiritual world. And what's happening in this chapter is the physical world. Jim and Tony and Phil and the others are fellow firefighters who are trying to rescue Mike from a collapsed building that he's in. And so this is the physical world. Mike's condition in that world is where there's an ongoing war in the spiritual realm. It influences the daily life in the physical world. And in that world, Mike's condition is grave. You know, while in the oubliette, Mike, in that awareness, he knows he's injured, but he doesn't feel that he's dying. And I don't know if any of the viewers ever saw the movie Jacob's Ladder. There was a bit of that movie is an inspiration in this book. And in the movie, the whole movie, an hour or so long, is a story that's going on in the mind of a guy who's just seconds away from dying. So it was a real interesting movie, and it kind of, you know, that idea leaked over into the inspiration for the oubliette. So yeah, this chapter is about Mike's team members trying to rescue him
And of
and
course,
coming
it's
to realize how close to death he really is.
because this is the building that he's in right on from chapter 1, rescuing the 2 street kids, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It is.
And
So
what's happened is the building has collapsed
yes,
on him.
yeah. So you see, everybody, how powerful a opening chapter has to be, because it reiterates right throughout the book, and it's done brilliantly here. Now, chapter 27, Under Attack. This is you bring us back to 9/11, 2001, Manhattan, a place I love very much. Jim, Tony, and Phil are desperate to rescue Mike, so we're still in this building again, everybody. And of course, they're asking for a jack because they need to get a jack to get him out. But the jack is not going to be coming, because there is the attack on the World Trade Center on that day. The Twin Towers collapse, and any rescue item is going to go towards the Twin Towers. So this is a poignant chapter. I think it's particularly for a lot of Americans, that day is very, very significant. Talk us through this chapter, Bruce. Why are you talking about that?
I mentioned earlier that the spiritual world that exists around us has influence on the physical world that we live in each day. There's a war going on, and people don't realize it because it's invisible to them. But I'm convinced that in the largest sense, the attack on the towers was spiritually motivated. And again, this chapter is a chapter that's taking place in the physical world. And it's the chapter in which Jim and Tony and Phil and Mike's team come to realize that they don't realize that Mike is under attack in a spiritual realm, while they suddenly realize that they're under attack in the physical realm. So it adds a lot of tension to the story, because what ends up happening is the disaster at the Twin Towers draws all of the resources that were focused on saving Mike. It draws them away, and suddenly they can't get the equipment they need. They can't get the supplies that they need. It's a major disaster for Mike. And he puts his team in the position of having to choose, or having to figure out what they can do to try to save him. They're on the verge of giving up. And, that's something that Jim refuses to do. So it establishes that bond between he and Mike, but it also establishes the reality that Mike is caught up in a spiritual realm, and that realm is influencing the physical world.
Interesting. Now, for me, the book takes a different, takes a different twist, takes a different route. And for me, this starts at chapter 30, Gog's Vengeance. And when you read the book, everybody, I think you will agree with me that Bruce is taking us onto a different plane here, a different level, different playing field, but still within the realms of what the book is all about. Here we have Hazel talking about a child. Is it the child of Mike when he was a boy? Don't know. Up to you, the viewer, to find that out. you talking about watchers, referring to gross deformity. You talk about the biblical city of Enoch, the sacrifices of the people of Canaan, what they made, ceremonial births, Zamyasal's dominating power. I know who Gog is, but can you tell the listeners the significance of Gog, not only in this chapter, but throughout the book?
Okay, I'll try. um, okay, so what's happening in chapter 30 is that Azazel, again, the demon, is relating the past to Mike. He's talking to him about things that happened in the past. And Mike wants to know very much in this negotiation that's going on between he and the demon about how they can escape the oubliette. Mike very much wants to know why the demon is imprisoned here. What did you do to deserve this? I mean, your buddies, Mike points out to him that your buddies aren't here. You're the only one that's here. Why is that? Azazel is very reluctant to relate that truth. And so he begins by giving Mike a history of man, actually of the world, even before man was a part of it. But in this particular chapter, he's talking about the result of the relationship between these fallen angels and human women. And that relationship was these deformed giants that used to roam the world. And the giants are very significant. I'm not going to get into that here because it's a very deep subject and it would take hours to go through. But they're very significant in the history of what happened in all three realms of the world. So what's happening here is, I think a major point that Mike makes in this chapter is that men learned the art of war from these fallen angels whom they saw as gods. And these gods, in an effort to try to replace men on the earth, men were created in God's image. These fallen angels wanted to create a race in their own image. And so that's what these Nephilim, these giants, were. They were the result of this union between human women and fallen angels. And it turned out to be an absolute disaster. And it was a disaster for everybody eventually. It was a disaster for men, for God, for the fallen angels, and for the giants themselves. So anyway, the important point is this, that because of Gog, Azazel taught the people of Canaan the art of war. The people of Enoch, he taught them the art of war. And as you know, as everybody knows, it's with us to this day.
Wow, fascinating. Let's go to the final chapter that we're going to talk about, Bruce, which is chapter 38, demonic confession. For me, Bruce, this book is almost a tale of two stories put into one book. Because at the beginning, you have Mike rescuing street kids, and from chapter 30 onwards, you change gear, so to speak. We read more about high priests, magical powers of the beings. You take us on a completely different plane. For example, in this demonic confessions chapter, you talk about Nimrod and his entourage of soldiers. You talk about a lion by his side. We have an angel, Trinity, who has come from heaven to earth so that the Lord would have first-hand knowledge of Nimrod and his affairs. We've got a tower with many levels, characters like Dur-Enki and Melchizedek. I have to say, Bruce, I've never known a book to be so dramatically different from start to end, both in characters and in the storyline. Why have you done this?
Okay, so prior to this chapter, the story becomes rather metaphoric. We didn't cover the chapter where Mike has this hallucination about being dead, and a goat finds him in the middle of the desert. So I won't go into all that, but it's all metaphoric, and it was a way of bringing Mike back to the oubliette because he had escaped, or thought he did anyway. But he ends up back there. In chapter 38, what's happening here is the point of view has changed to a third person. It's a narration now. And what's happening is happened in the past. We're talking about Nimrod, who has built the Tower of Babel, which, as you may know, was built in defiance of God. In other words, it was man expressing his independence and intellect,
And the tower, of course, has got different levels. And there was only, the high priests and people who were allowed to go above the third level. Am I right?
Yes, you're right. And that's me, that's all speculative fiction.
That's brilliantly done.
But the story is about a confrontation between God, who's represented in the angel named Trinity. The Bible frequently refers to an angel called the angel of the Lord.
Yes.
And the first time that angel appears in the Bible, it appears as three separate people in the story of Abraham. And it's just before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So I took that theme, of the three persons, and I used that as the Trinity angel. So you note that there are three individuals who make up this angel.
And of course you could write another book on the Trinity, couldn't you? You could write another book on the Trinity itself.
You certainly could, and there's been many written. Yeah. So this angel represents God, who's confronting Azazel for his crimes, because Azazel is the one who has inspired the tower and all of this stuff against God. And so God confronts him, and in that confrontation, God shows Nimrod and the people that Azazel is a liar, that he's not really a god. He serves God, and he's a servant of God, not a god himself. And then what happens is he condemns him to the oubliette. So this chapter is bringing the story full circle. And Mike gets his explanation about why Azazel is imprisoned there.
There you go, everyone. Bruce, what's next for you? What, any more books coming down the line? There
are. I'm old, John. I'm an old guy.
Old in maybe, not in spirit.
Well, I hope not. Yes, you're right. I hope not. But what I really hope is I hope that I have enough time left to write all the books that are in my head. I will tell you this, I'm working currently on 2 new books. One of them is the next book in the Bible Book Club series. It's called Patriarch, and it's a story of Abraham. It's not the story of Abraham, that would take volumes, but
Okay.
is a story of Abraham.
And when's that
And
likely
the
to
other
come out?
book, I'm sorry, what?
When's that likely to come out?
I'm hoping to have it out by September.
Ooh, let's hope we get to interview him again, everybody.
Yes.
Bruce,
And
who do you see as your market here? Who do you want to read your books?
C.S. Lewis famously said this. He said, the world doesn't need another Christian writer. The world needs writers who are Christians. And that's what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be a writer who is a Christian. So I'm not writing for the Christian book market. I want to reach a wider audience because I have a story to tell. It's the same story that saved C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you've seen the movie, The Reluctant Convert.
Oh, yeah.
It's an important movie, but it tells the story about how C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and he came to know God because of his relationship with the Lord of the Rings. Help me here, John. Who am I thinking of?
I can't remember either. So let's stop digging a hole.
J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, yeah, J.R.R. Tolkien, yeah.
Yes.
Lord of the Rings, not the Lord of the Kings.
And Tolkien made C.S. Lewis see the story in
They knew
Bible.
each other from university.
Yes, they did.
They knew each other from university. They were friends.
And
Yeah.
he made Lewis see the story in the Bible. And that's what I'm trying to relate to people is the story. There's a story there that's important to the world.
So where can people get your books from?
Well, they can get the digital books from any place that sells digital books. Amazon, iBooks, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, any of them. And they can get the printed book from either Barnes and Noble or Amazon.
There you go, everyone. Bruce James Wilson, thank you very much for coming on my show to talk about your book, The Oubliette. A book.
Oh, John, I thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. So go and have a look at his book, everybody. It's absolutely absorbing. I was captured by it. I'm Jody Crowley. Thanks for listening, watching, wherever you're in the world. Stay safe.